My name is Sloane Jacobs. I'm 29, a quant on Wall Street. My boss, Arthur Vance, forced me to sabotage the very trading algorithm I created, all to deliberately orchestrate a catastrophic $347 million loss. His reason? To manufacture a crisis, seize emergency control, and sell off the firm's crown jewels, billions in tech stocks, to a competitor for pennies on the dollar, all for a massive kickback. Once the plan worked, he fired me in front of the entire company, making me the fall guy for his heist. He thought he'd committed the perfect crime and crushed some nameless programmer. But he made a fatal mistake. I had secretly built a logger that recorded every piece of evidence of his collusion with his rival. And here's the cruelest twist. While the firm was bleeding out $347 million, my own ghost algorithm was quietly raking in $42 million on the side. Arthur thought he had gotten rid of me for good. In reality, he just handed the one enemy who knew his true face a war chest to begin his absolute destruction. The market doesn't send you a calendar invite before it ruins your life. It doesn't care that you just refilled your coffee or that you've been running on 4 hours of sleep for 3 straight weeks. At 9:47 a.m. on a cold Tuesday in October, the market, with a little help from my boss, decided to end my career. I just didn't know it yet. For the last 5 years, I've been a quantitative analyst at Sterling Gable, one of the more aggressive hedge funds on Wall Street. To the traders on the floor, the guys who shout into phones and live on steak dinners and adrenaline, I was a ghost. A quant. I lived in a world of pure data, of elegant code and statistical probability. I didn't predict the market, I modeled its chaos. My creation, the project that consumed my life, was an algorithmic trading system I called Chronos. It was my masterpiece, a complex symphony of code designed to execute thousands of trades per second, exploiting microscopic market inefficiencies. Chronos was the reason Sterling Gable had outperformed every competitor for 8 consecutive quarters. It was the reason my boss, Arthur Vance, was on the cover of Forbes last month. Sloane, a word, Arthur's voice boomed from the doorway of my glass-walled office. He didn't enter, he summoned. Arthur was a man sculpted from Wall Street clichés, a tailored suit that cost more than my first car, a Rolex that gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and a predatory smile that never quite reached his eyes. I minimized a screen of cascading green and red numbers and turned. "Morning, Arthur. Everything okay with the latency tests?" "The tests are fine. You're fine," he said, waving a dismissive hand. "It's about Lyra Capital. Damian Cross is eating our lunch in the commodities market this quarter." He said the name Damian Cross like it was a curse. Lyra was our white whale, the one fund that occasionally matched our pace, and Arthur hated them with a religious fervor. "Chronos is too conservative. It's leaving money on the table. I want you to increase its risk appetite." I felt a familiar knot tighten in my stomach. "Arthur, we've discussed this. The risk parameters are optimized for long-term stability. If we make it more aggressive, we increase the potential for a cascade failure. The model isn't designed for that level of volatility." "Models, parameters, stability," he scoffed, stepping inside. The scent of his expensive cologne filled the small space. "This isn't a university research project, Sloane. This is a war. I need you to loosen the reins. Let the algorithm do what it was designed to do, hunt." Standing behind him, leaning against the doorframe, was Leo Petrov. Leo was the head of manual trading, a relic from the pre-algorithm era who viewed my work with deep suspicion. He was all gut feelings and market whispers, and he saw Chronos as an existential threat. "Or maybe," Leo chimed in, a smirk playing on his lips, "the little black box can't handle a real market. Maybe you need a human touch." I ignored Leo, keeping my eyes on Arthur. "The system can handle it. The question is whether the firm can handle the exposure. I'd need to run at least a week of simulations." "We don't have a week," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "The quarterly report is in 10 days. I need a win, a big one. Make the change, Sloane. That's an order, not a request." He turned to leave, then paused. "And document that the adjustment was made as part of a standard system optimization. Understood?" I understood perfectly. He wanted the potential upside of my work, but he was already building a paper trail to make me the scapegoat if it all went wrong. "Understood," I said, my voice as flat as the monitor in front of me. As they walked away, I saw Leo clap Arthur on the back. They were an odd pair, the old-school trader and the new-school titan, but they were united in their belief that my job was to provide the tools, and their job was to take the risks and the glory. I swiveled back to my 6 monitors, my sanctuary of logic and order. This wasn't the first time Arthur had pushed the boundaries. For the past 6 months, his requests had grown bolder, his understanding of the underlying mechanics of Chronos strangely specific. He wasn't a quant, but he started asking questions a layman would never think of, pointing out lines of code and asking about obscure variables. It was like someone was feeding him the questions, someone who knew the system. That's when I started building my insurance policy. Chronos was a marvel of engineering, but like any fortress, it had hidden passages. I built it with layers of monitoring protocols. Most were visible to the firm's IT security team, but one was not. It was a silent, encrypted logger that recorded every single query, every parameter change, every keystroke made within Chronos' core programming. It watermarked the data with a digital signature, timestamp, and the specific terminal ID from which the change was made. It was my black box within the black box. And then there was Nyx. Nyx was my personal project, my sandbox. I named her after the Greek goddess of the night, a system that operated in the shadows. On the surface, it was a simulation engine I used to test new theories, but its true function was far more complex. Nyx could run in parallel to Chronos, a ghost in the machine. It could read Chronos' instructions, but execute its own modified trades through a series of anonymous, offshore accounts I'd set up months ago. It was my hedge against the one variable I could never fully model: human greed. I spent the next hour making the changes Arthur demanded. I increased the risk appetite by 15%, a number that made my skin crawl. Every line of code I wrote felt like a betrayal of my own design principles. As I hit execute, I sent a quick message to my junior programmer, Marcus. Marcus, can you double-check the integrity of the real-time data feed from the Frankfurt Exchange? Seeing some minor packet loss. It was a lie. The feed was perfect. But I needed a witness, a digital alibi. I needed Marcus's logs to show that I was focused on a mundane technical issue at the exact moment I was being forced to compromise my own system. On it, he replied instantly. Marcus was young, brilliant, and still believed that code could solve everything. He hadn't been on Wall Street long enough to become cynical. I then messaged my only real friend at the firm, Jenna Sharma, over a secure messaging app. Jenna was in the compliance department, a lawyer whose job was to keep people like Arthur from coloring outside the lines. He's at it again, I typed, forcing a major risk profile change on Chronos, wants it documented as standard optimization. Her reply came back seconds later. Sloan, you need to file a formal objection. Email it to me and CC Arthur. Create a record. He'll fire me on the spot. He'll fire you anyway if this goes bad. At least this way you're protected. She was right, of course, but I had a different kind of protection in mind. Don't worry, I typed. I'm documenting everything, just not on the company servers. I spent the rest of the day in a state of high alert. Chronos was performing as expected, unnervingly so. The new, aggressive strategy was working. It was raking in small, rapid-fire profits at a dizzying rate. By midday, we were up 60 million. Arthur walked by my office and gave me a smug wink. Leo, for the first time ever, gave me a curt nod that almost looked like respect. They saw the flashing green numbers, the immediate gratification. I saw a system stretched to its breaking point, a tightrope walker dancing in a hurricane. My ghost algorithm, Nyx, was working too. It mirrored every high-risk trade Chronos made, but with a crucial difference. For every aggressive buy Chronos executed, Nyx performed a complex series of countertrades, shorting related assets, buying put options, all designed to profit if Chronos' strategy suddenly and catastrophically failed. It was a perfect hedge, invisible to my own company. The first sign of trouble came at 3:15 p.m. a flicker. A single, anomalous trade reported from a dark pool, a private exchange where institutions trade anonymously. It was a massive sell order for a tech stock that Chronos had just taken a huge long position in. The sell order was executed a millisecond before Chronos' buy order hit the public exchange. It was a classic case of front-running, but on a scale and at a speed that should have been impossible. Chronos should have detected it. I dove into the logs. There it was, a micro-directive buried deep in the code Arthur had told me to change. A single line that created a blind spot. It instructed Chronos to ignore dark pool data from one specific routing number for any trade over a certain size. It was a keyhole deliberately drilled into the heart of my fortress. And that routing number, I ran a trace. It led back to a shell corporation, which, after 3 more layers of obfuscation, led back to an investment vehicle owned by Lyra Capital, by Damian Cross. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just recklessness. This was a setup. Arthur wasn't just increasing risk, he was signaling his moves to a competitor. He was using Kronos to take a massive, highly visible position, while Lyra Capital, armed with that knowledge, took the opposite position in the shadows, ready to cash in when it all collapsed. Before I could even process the full implication, the cascade began. It started in the tech sector, then spread to financials. The sell-off was surgical. Everywhere Kronos went long, a massive, unseen force went short. The market, sensing weakness, followed suit. The flashing green on my screen turned to a waterfall of crimson. Alarms started blaring on the trading floor. Shouts echoed through the office. "What the hell is happening?" Leo bellowed, storming towards my office. "Your machine is bleeding us dry?" "It's not the machine," I said, my voice eerily calm as I watched hundreds of millions of dollars evaporate. "It's being targeted." "Then shut it down," he yelled. I looked at my screen, at the silent logger in the background, which was now painting a beautiful, damning picture of the digital theft in progress. "Not yet," I whispered. "It's not done talking." By the time the closing bell rang at 4:00 p.m., the damage was done. Kronos had posted a single-day loss of $347 million, an unprecedented failure. My office was silent, a tomb in the middle of a war zone. Arthur appeared at my door. His face was a mask of theatrical fury. Leo and 2 members of the board stood behind him. "Jacobs," Arthur's voice was ice. "What did you do?" "I made the changes you ordered," I said, meeting his gaze. "The risk parameters you insisted on. I authorized an optimization, not financial suicide," he roared, pointing a trembling finger at me. "Your algorithm is a catastrophic failure. You've exposed this firm to unacceptable losses. You're a liability." He was using the exact words I knew he would. It was all part of the script he'd written in his head. "Security will escort you out. Your access has been revoked. You are terminated, effective immediately. Pack your personal belongings." I nodded slowly, a strange sense of peace settling over me. I stood up and began placing the few personal items from my desk into my bag: a small succulent, a framed photo of my sister, a spare phone charger. The whole time, my mind was racing, not with fear, but with calculation. The silent logger had captured everything. Arthur's terminal ID making the final, fatal change to the source code, the exact time, the specific lines he altered. Nix, my ghost, had performed flawlessly. While Kronos was losing $347 million for Sterling Gable, Nix had made just over $42 million for me. As 2 large security guards loomed in the doorway, Arthur leaned in close, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for me. "You'll never work on Wall Street again. I'll make sure of it." I looked him straight in the eye. I didn't say a word. I just gave him the slightest, almost imperceptible smile. He thought he was watching a career end. He had no idea he was watching a fuse being lit. He thought he was firing a failed programmer. He didn't know he had just created his worst enemy, armed with his own digital fingerprints and $42 million of his own stolen money. The game wasn't over. It had just begun. The walk from my office to the elevator felt like a mile. Every head on the trading floor turned. I saw a mixture of pity, morbid curiosity, and a few flashes of undisguised satisfaction. These were the people who celebrated Kronos' wins as their own, but its failure belonged to me and me alone. The 2 security guards, men I'd exchanged pleasantries with every morning, flanked me with grim professionalism, their presence a clear signal to everyone else. She is an outcast. As the elevator doors slid shut, sealing me off from the life I had built, I didn't feel sadness. I felt the cold, clean burn of purpose. My apartment, usually a haven of quiet minimalism, felt like a cage. The view of the East River, which normally calmed me, now seemed to mock my confinement. I dropped my bag on the floor, and for a full 10 minutes I just stood in the silence, letting the reality of the situation wash over me. Fired, disgraced, blacklisted. The words echoed in the empty room. Arthur was right, my official career on Wall Street was over, but my real work was just beginning. I didn't open my laptop. I didn't turn on my TV. My apartment was compromised. In this world, the first thing they do is get a court order to image your devices, looking for any evidence of wrongdoing you might be stupid enough to keep at home. Instead, I took out a burner phone I'd bought with cash 2 months ago. I'd known on some level that this day might come. I dialed the first number. Jenna Sharma. Her voice was crisp, professional, even on her personal line. Jenna, it's me, it happened. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end. Sloan, what happened? Are you okay? Where are you? I'm at home. Arthur fired me. They're blaming the whole $347 million loss on me, called it a catastrophic failure of my algorithm. That son of a bitch, she hissed, the legal decorum gone. He finally did it. Okay, listen to me. Do not talk to anyone. Do not log into any company accounts from any device. Don't even log into your personal email if you've ever accessed it from a work computer. They will use anything and everything against you. What did you say when they fired you? Nothing, I just packed my succulent and left. A small, humorless laugh came down the line. Good, okay, good, first thing tomorrow we're meeting, I know a place. But Sloan, you need to tell me everything. What proof do you have? Because right now it's your word against Arthur Vance's and he owns the damn building. I have proof, I said, my voice low and confident. I have everything. The logs, the timestamps, the terminal IDs. I have a complete record of every change he made and every backdoor he created. There was a long pause. When Jenna spoke again, her voice was full of awe and terror. Sloan, what did you do? This isn't just about getting fired anymore, is it? You're talking about fraud, market manipulation on a massive scale. These people don't just fire you for that, they bury you. They're going to try, I said, looking out at the city lights beginning to flicker on. But they think they're burying a programmer. They don't know they're burying the architect. After the call, I changed into an anonymous gray hoodie and jeans, grabbed a pre-packed go bag from the back of my closet, and left my apartment, leaving my personal phone and laptop on the kitchen counter. I took the subway 3 stops downtown, switched to another line going uptown, and got off in a neighborhood I never visited. From there, I walked 12 blocks to a nondescript co-working space where I'd rented a small, windowless office under a corporate shell name, Cassandra Data Solutions. It was my real office, my command center. Inside, the air was cool and smelled of fresh paint. I unpacked my gear, a powerful, custom-built laptop with an encrypted solid-state drive, 3 monitors, and a series of hard drives. For the next 5 hours, I worked. The data from my silent logger flowed onto the screen, a perfect narrative of corporate treason. It was all there, clearer than I could have hoped. Arthur's unique login, the changes made from his personal office terminal, the insertion of the Darkpool blind spot, the final, fatal adjustment to the risk parameters, but the real story was in the money trail. I cross-referenced the timestamps of Kronos' losing trades with the winning trades Nix had executed. Then I started digging into Lyra Capital. It took me hours, peeling back layers of shell corporations and offshore accounts, but I found the connection. A shared director on the board of a Cayman Islands holding company, a series of wire transfers that moved money from Lyra, through the Caymans, and into a private equity fund managed by Arthur Vance's brother-in-law. It was a closed loop of corruption. They weren't just splitting the profits from my algorithm's failure, they were laundering them. My hands flew across the keyboard. This was what I was built for, finding the pattern in the noise, the signal in the chaos. The rage that had been simmering inside me all day channeled itself into pure, cold focus. Next, I called Marcus. I used a voice modulator, a precaution that felt both paranoid and necessary. Hello? His voice was hesitant. Marcus, it's Sloan. Sloan, oh my God, are you okay? The whole office is chaos. They're telling everyone you went rogue, that you pushed a bad update to the system against orders. It's a lie, Marcus. You know it is. I need your help. Anything, he said without a moment's hesitation. His loyalty was a small point of light in the darkness. What do you need? I need eyes and ears. I need to know what they're doing to Kronos, who they've put in charge of it, what their official story is. But you cannot get caught. Communicate only through this number, text only, and delete everything immediately. If you feel like you're in any danger, you stop. Your safety is more important. They put Leo in charge, he said, his voice laced with disgust. He's walking around like he won the lottery. He's got 2 of the senior guys trying to deconstruct your code. They look like chimps trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. Don't worry, Sloan. They won't find a thing. I'll be your ghost. My last task of the night was reconnaissance. I hacked into the reservation system of a 5-star steakhouse in Midtown, a known haunt for the Wall Street elite. I searched for Arthur Vance's name. There it was. A table for 2 at 9 p.m. in the most secluded booth. The other name on the reservation sent a jolt of electricity through me, Damien Cross. They were celebrating. I couldn't be there myself, but I had ways of listening. I paid a freelance data broker in Bitcoin for access to the cell phone tower data for the block the restaurant was on. It was a legal gray area, but I was long past caring about that. I isolated the two burner phone numbers I knew belonged to Vance and Cross. It was a long shot, but sometimes arrogance makes men careless. I initiated a passive intercept. I couldn't hear their call, but I could listen for ambient data packets if one of them was foolish enough to connect to the restaurant's unsecured Wi-Fi. And Arthur was that foolish. At 9:32 p.m., his phone pinged the network. The microphone wasn't active, but the connection itself was a wire. I piggybacked on the handshake protocol, using an exploit to capture fragmented data streams. It wasn't clean audio, but after running it through 3 different filters, I could piece together snippets of their conversation. Perfectly executed. A smooth voice I recognized as Damien Cross's said, the sound of ice clinking in a glass. The girl took the fall without a fight. "She's smart, but she's naive," Arthur replied, his voice thick with smugness. "She lives in her world of numbers. She never saw the real game being played. The $347 million is a small price to pay to gut Sterling Gable's quant division. And for phase 2, Cross said, his voice lower, is everything in place? The board is panicking. They've given me emergency authority. We start liquidating the secondary tech holdings tomorrow morning to cover the losses. Exactly the assets you want. We'll drive the price down. You'll buy them for pennies on the dollar through our shared fund. By the time anyone realizes what happened, we'll control the most valuable portfolio of pre-IPO tech stocks on the street." My heart hammered against my ribs. It was bigger than I thought. The $347 million loss wasn't the goal. It was the catalyst. It was the excuse Arthur needed to seize control and sell off the company's most valuable assets to his rival at a ridiculous discount, all for a massive kickback. They weren't just sinking a ship to collect the insurance, they were selling it for scrap while everyone was busy trying to plug the hole. "What about the algorithm?" Cross asked. "Chronos, can your man Leo control it?" Arthur laughed, a loud, grating sound. "Leo can't code his way out of a paper bag, but it doesn't matter. We're shutting it down, declaring the entire quant strategy a failure. We're going back to basics, back to a time when men made decisions, not machines." I leaned back in my chair, the fragmented audio looping in my ears. The arrogance of it was breathtaking. They were so confident in their victory, so sure that I was neutralized. They thought they had killed the machine. But I was the machine's ghost, and I was about to haunt them. My first instinct was to package everything I had, the logs, the money trail, the audio recording, and send it to the SEC. It was what Jenna would advise. It was the right thing to do. But I knew how the game was played. The SEC would open an investigation. It would take months, maybe years. Lawyers would get involved. Arthur and Damien would use their money and influence to bury it in motions and delays. By the time they were ever held accountable, phase 2 would be complete. They'd have their money and Sterling Gable would be a hollowed-out shell. No, the system they were exploiting was too slow to stop them. Justice delayed would be justice denied. They used the market as a weapon against me. I would turn the market into a weapon against them. They thought Chronos was dead. They didn't know I still held the keys. They were about to start liquidating assets, deliberately driving down prices. They thought they were the only ones who knew it was coming. They were wrong. A plan began to form in my mind, a strategy so audacious, so high-risk, it made Arthur's scheme look like child's play. He wanted to use a $347 million loss to steal a portfolio worth billions. I would use his own plan, his own greed, to take it all back. And then some. I turned to my monitors, the glow of the screens reflecting in my eyes. It was time to wake up Nix. The next morning, the official narrative hit the street. The Wall Street Journal ran a front-page story, quoting an anonymous high-level source at Sterling Gable. The headline was brutal. Rogue algorithm causes $347 M meltdown at Sterling Gable. My name wasn't mentioned, but it didn't have to be. The article painted a picture of a brilliant but unstable quant who pushed an untested, hyper-aggressive algorithm against the advice of senior management. I was Icarus, flying too close to the sun on wings of flawed code. It was a masterpiece of corporate spin, and Arthur's fingerprints were all over it. I read the article from the sterile quiet of my command center, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. They were building their case, salting the earth so nothing could ever grow from my career again. It was almost poetic. I spent the morning preparing for war. With the 42 million Nix had generated, I had capital. I divided it into 12 separate accounts across 3 continents, each one held by a different anonymous trust. Spreading the risk, compartmentalizing the assets, it was basic tradecraft. From the outside, it would look like a dozen disconnected, mid-level traders. No one would see the single mind guiding them all. At 9:30 a.m., as the opening bell rang, the attack began. Just as Arthur had told Damien, Sterling Gable started dumping its secondary tech holdings. These weren't the big names like Apple or Google. These were the hungry up-and-comers, the pre-IPO companies with disruptive technology that Kronos had identified months, even years ago. They were the firm's crown jewels, and Arthur was selling them off like scrap metal. Leo Petrov, in his new role as head of the liquidation, was a sledgehammer. He wasn't finessing the sales. He was flooding the market with massive sell orders, deliberately creating panic and driving the prices down. I watched my monitors, a cascade of red. A promising biotech firm down 12%, a leader in AI-driven logistics down 18%, an innovator in renewable energy storage down 22%. It was a bloodbath, and Damien Cross, through Lyra Capital, was there to catch the falling knives. His algorithms, designed to be invisible, were patiently absorbing the shares at rock-bottom prices. He was getting $1 billion portfolio for a fraction of its true worth. But they didn't know there was a third player in the game, me. "All right, Nix," I whispered to the empty room. "Let's go to work." I didn't try to buy against the tide. That would be suicide. I would be wiped out in minutes. Instead, I used Arthur and Damien's own strategy against them. For every block of shares Sterling Gable sold, I didn't just let Lyra Capital buy it. I used a complex series of options contracts to bet on the stock's continued decline in the short term. I was shorting the very assets I believed in. It felt like a betrayal, but it was a necessary one. With every tick downward, my capital grew. The market was bleeding, and I was collecting the blood. Simultaneously, I initiated the second part of my plan. I contacted Jenna. "Meet me in an hour. The place we discussed," I said, and hung up. The place was a dusty, forgotten law library at the back of the New York City Bar Association. No cameras, no Wi-Fi, just the smell of old paper and leather. Jenna was already there, sitting at a long oak table, a file folder in front of her. Her face was etched with worry. "Sloan, this is insane," she said, her voice a low, urgent whisper. "The whole street is talking. They're making you sound like a lunatic." "I know what they're saying," I said, sliding into the chair opposite her. "Now, I'm going to tell you the truth." For the next 20 minutes, I laid it all out. Arthur, Damien Cross, the dark pool blind spot, the prearranged sell-off, the Cayman Islands account, the plan to steal the tech portfolio. I didn't show her my logs or play her the audio. Not yet. First, I needed to see if she believed me. She listened without interruption, her lawyer's mind processing every detail. When I finished, she was silent for a full minute, her eyes searching mine. "If even half of what you're saying is true," she finally said, "this is one of the biggest cases of coordinated market fraud in a decade. We need to go to the SEC. Now." "No," I said firmly. "The SEC is too slow. By the time they unfreeze their first subpoena, Arthur and Damien will be on a beach somewhere, and Sterling Gable will be a footnote in a textbook. We're not going to the SEC. You are." I pushed a sleek, encrypted USB drive across the table. On this drive is a carefully curated selection of the evidence. It proves Arthur manipulated Kronos. It shows the money trail between him and Damien. It's enough to get an investigation started. A loud, public investigation. I want you to take it to your contact at the SEC, the one you trust. "My contact?" she asked, confused. "Don't play coy, Jenna. I know you used to work in the enforcement division. And I know you still have lunch with your old boss, Director Stevenson, once a month. I want this on his desk by the end of the day." Jenna stared at the drive as if it were a scorpion. "Sloan, if I do this, my career is over. I'll be blackballed for violating attorney-client privilege, even if it's to report a crime." "They're destroying my career to cover up their crimes," I countered, my voice hard. "Sometimes you have to burn a bridge to save the city. This is bigger than your career or mine. This is about them thinking they are untouchable. Are they?" She looked at me, her jaw set. I saw the conflict in her eyes, the fear warring with her innate sense of justice. "What's the rest of the evidence? You said this was a curated selection." "The rest is my leverage, the full, unedited logs, the audio of their celebration dinner, everything. That doesn't see the light of day until I say so. This," I tapped the drive, "is the warning shot. This gets the SEC to start asking questions. And when they start asking questions, Arthur will start to panic. And panicking men make mistakes." She took the drive. "You're playing a dangerous game." "It's the only game they've left me," I replied. Back at my command center, the market was still in freefall. My short positions were now up over 30%. My initial $42 million had grown to nearly $55 million, but I knew this couldn't last. The liquidation would end, the prices would stabilize, and I'd be left with nothing but profits from a tragedy. It was time for phase 3. I started to buy. Not with huge, obvious orders, but with thousands of small, almost invisible ones, routed through my 12 anonymous accounts. While Lyra Capital was swallowing whole companies, I was nibbling at the edges, accumulating shares of the very tech companies Sterling Gable was trying to destroy. The biotech firm, the AI logistics company, the renewable energy innovator. My system, Nix, was designed to mimic the trading patterns of dozens of different small-scale investors, a school of piranhas moving as one. I received a text from Marcus. Leo is bragging that he's almost done. He's pushing the last block of Ethelred Biosystems through now, says he's clearing the deadwood. Ethelred Biosystems. It was one of my highest conviction picks, a company on the verge of a breakthrough in synthetic protein generation. Kronos had flagged it as a potential 10-bagger. And Leo was calling it Deadwood. I focused all my buying power on it. The share price had been hammered down to $11. I knew, with every fiber of my being, it was worth 5 times that. By the end of the trading day, the damage was done. Sterling Gable had successfully liquidated the entire portfolio. Lyra Capital had acquired the lion's share. And I, operating in the margins, had used my profits from the short selling to acquire a significant, but still minority, stake in half a dozen of the most promising companies. That evening, the news broke. SEC opens inquiry into Sterling Gable trading irregularities. Jenna had done it. Director Stevenson's name was mentioned. It was a clear signal to the street that this was serious. The warning shot had been fired. Arthur Vance would see it. He would know it could have only come from one of 2 people, me or someone in his inner circle. He'd assume it was me, and he would assume that I had given them everything. His next move would be to cover his tracks, to distance himself from Damian Cross, to make it look like Lyra Capital had simply taken advantage of a market downturn. But I knew him better than that. Arthur Vance didn't just cover his tracks, he erased the road. He would need a new scapegoat. Me, the disgruntled, fired employee, leaking doctored documents to the SEC out of revenge. To do that, he'd need to prove I was a criminal. He'd need to access my systems, my personal accounts, to find or plant evidence. And my apartment, with my personal laptop and phone sitting on the counter, was the perfect bait. I accessed the hidden security cameras I'd installed in my apartment weeks ago. They were disguised as smoke detectors and power adapters. I sat in the darkness of my rented office, watching my empty living room on one of my monitors, waiting. At 2:17 a.m., the lock on my apartment door clicked open. Not smashed, but picked. A professional. A man in dark clothes, face obscured by a baseball cap, slipped inside. He wasn't a common burglar. He moved with a quiet efficiency, sweeping the room with a device to check for bugs. He walked straight to my desk, pulled out a small device, and plugged it into my laptop. A hardware keylogger and data clone. He was planting his own black box to record anything I might do and stealing every byte of data on the machine. He was good, but I was better. The laptop he was cloning was a decoy. It was an exact replica of my personal machine, but I had prepared it for this exact moment. The operating system was a sandboxed environment. The files were real enough to look convincing, but anything sensitive was either encrypted with a key he'd never break or subtly altered. And the moment he plugged in his device, a silent alarm tripped. The laptop's network card, operating on a hidden frequency, sent a single, encrypted packet of data to my server. The packet contained a beautiful piece of malware of my own design. It wouldn't brick his device. That was too obvious. It would do something much more elegant. It would patch the cloner's firmware, instructing it to corrupt a tiny, random percentage of the data it was stealing, not enough to be immediately obvious, but enough to render any evidence he found completely unreliable in court. And more importantly, it would turn his device into a beacon. It would ping its location to me every 60 seconds, painting a map of its journey right back to whoever had sent it. I watched the man work for 10 minutes, then slip back out into the night. I leaned back, a real, genuine smile spreading across my face. "Got you," I whispered. Arthur thought he was hunting me in the dark. He had no idea I could see every move he made. He thought he was in control of the narrative, planting evidence to frame me. He was about to find out that the story had a new author, and she was just getting to the good part. The beacon on my screen pulsed with a steady, reassuring rhythm. It was a digital breadcrumb, and I followed it obsessively through the pre-dawn hours. The man who broke into my apartment was a professional, but he was also a creature of habit. He didn't go back to some shadowy warehouse or a nondescript office park. He went home, to a luxury condo in Tribeca, a building known for its high-end security and discreet residence. I ran the deed records through a public database. The condo wasn't owned by the man himself, but by a trust. A trust whose sole trustee was a familiar name, Leo Petrov. It was almost disappointingly simple. Arthur hadn't hired a disconnected third-party firm. He had used his own bulldog. It was sloppy, arrogant, and exactly what I would expect from them. They believed they were so insulated by money and power that they didn't even need to cover their tracks properly. They had handed me a direct, physical link between the illegal break-in and Sterling Gable's senior management. This was no longer just about financial fraud. This was a felony. My burner phone buzzed with an encrypted text from Marcus. My blood ran cold as I read it. Emergency. Vance just announced a firm-wide data security audit, mandatory, effective immediately. They're bringing in an outside consultant, a company called Veridian Digital Forensics. They're locking down all servers for a full diagnostic and wipe. It's a purge, Sloan. They're going to erase everything. Veridian Digital Forensics. I knew the name. They were corporate assassins. The company you hired when you needed data to disappear forever, with a certified, court-admissible report saying it was all just routine maintenance. Arthur wasn't just covering his tracks. He was burning the whole forest down. The original server logs, the email records, the official record of Kronos' performance, it would all be gone by the end of the week. The curated evidence I had given Jenna would be my word against a certified report from a neutral third party. He was trying to make my proof an orphan with no source to verify it. The ticking clock I'd been hearing in my head was now a deafening alarm bell. The phone buzzed again. This time it was Jenna. I answered, my voice tight. "Tell me you have good news." "Not exactly," she said, her voice strained. "Stevenson is taking it seriously. He's issued subpoenas, but Sterling Gable's lawyers are already stonewalling. They're filing motions to quash, citing proprietary trading secrets, claiming it's a baseless fishing expedition prompted by a disgruntled ex-employee. They're going to tie this up in court for months." "I don't have months," I said, watching the location beacon pulse on my screen. "I have days, maybe hours, before the primary evidence is legally wiped from existence." "There's more, Sloan," she said, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "Arthur's lawyers filed a motion for a temporary restraining order against you. They're painting you as unhinged and vindictive. They're claiming you've made threats. They want a judge to order you to turn over all your personal devices and stay 1,000 feet away from any Sterling Gable employee." It was a classic legal strangulation. He was trying to disarm me, to cut me off from Marcus, to make me a digital ghost. "He won't get it," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "He might." "Sloan, be careful. These are not people who play by the rules. What you're doing, it's not just about money anymore. You're threatening their freedom. People do desperate things in that situation." As if on cue, something caught my eye on the monitor displaying my command center's own security feed. A man was standing across the street from the building's entrance. He was just leaning against a wall, scrolling on his phone. But it was the same build, the same baseball cap as the man who had broken into my apartment. He wasn't trying to get in. He wasn't doing anything suspicious. He was just there, being seen. It was a message. "We know where you are. We can get to you anytime we want." My meticulously constructed anonymity had been breached. The fortress I had built for myself suddenly felt like it was made of glass. A cold knot of genuine fear tightened in my gut. This wasn't a game of numbers on a screen anymore. I ended the call with Jenna, my mind racing. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. Fear was a data point like any other. It had to be analyzed and acted upon. They were escalating. They were moving from legal threats to physical intimidation. They were trying to make me run, to make me hide, because they were scared. And they were right to be. They thought wiping the servers was their checkmate. But they didn't know I had the one thing their money couldn't buy and their lawyers couldn't bury, the audio recording from the steakhouse. I had Arthur Vance in his own voice laying out the entire conspiracy. Phase 2, the plan to liquidate the tech portfolio. And I knew which assets they had to sell next. I pulled up the Sterling Gable portfolio, the one I knew by heart. They had sold the riskiest, most volatile tech stocks first to create the biggest splash. But the core of the portfolio, the companies that were more stable but had enormous long-term potential, were still there. Arthur would have to sell those too to complete his deal with Damien, and he'd have to do it tomorrow, before the SEC's inquiry gained enough traction to freeze the firm's assets. It was time to stop playing defense. I spent the next hour reallocating all my capital. The $55 million I had was a pittance compared to the billions Arthur and Damien were throwing around. But I had an advantage they didn't: certainty. I knew exactly where the lightning was going to strike. I chose my target, a company called Lumina Dynamics. They designed and manufactured the next generation of LiDAR sensors, the eyes for autonomous vehicles. They were on the cusp of signing a massive contract with a German auto manufacturer. The stock was stable, a blue chip of the future, but it was on Arthur's list. He had to sell it to complete phase 2. I took a deep breath and began to build my wall. I didn't buy shares directly. That would be too slow and too obvious. Instead, I moved into the derivatives market. I bought call options, thousands of them. I bought them just slightly out of the money with an expiration date of Friday. It was an incredibly aggressive, all-or-nothing bet. I was wagering everything I had that Lumina Dynamics stock wouldn't just hold its value, it would rise and rise dramatically in the next 48 hours. The market makers who sold me those options, the big investment banks, immediately had to hedge their own positions. To protect themselves from the risk I had just created for them, they had no choice but to start buying Lumina Dynamics stock on the open market. It was a feedback loop. My massive options purchase was forcing the biggest players on the street to create buying pressure. By the time the market opened the next morning, my trap was set. I watched the opening bell from my command center. The man in the baseball cap was gone. The threat still lingered, but for now the battlefield was the market. At 9:45 a.m. it started. A massive block of Lumina Dynamics shares hit the market. Leo Petrov was at it again, the sledgehammer trying to smash the price. A red candle appeared on my screen as the stock dipped. 2%, 3%. The selling pressure was immense. But then something beautiful happened. The wall held. The market makers, forced to hedge against my options, were buying every share Leo was selling. Instead of panicking, the market saw a massive sell-off being absorbed without a crash. It signaled incredible strength. Other algorithms, the ones that hunt for unusual volume and price stability, kicked in. They started buying too. The red candle turned green. The price didn't just stabilize, it started to climb. Leo was dumping millions of shares and the price was going up. My phone exploded with a frantic text from Marcus. Holy S**SLONE, what did you do? Leo is screaming. He keeps selling and the price keeps rising. The whole trading floor is watching. Vance is in his office, he just threw something against the wall, they're trapped. If they stop selling, the price will skyrocket and their deal with Cross is ruined. If they keep selling, they're just giving away shares to a rising market and fueling the fire. They don't understand what's happening. I understood. I was using their own weapon overwhelming market force against them. They were trying to create a tidal wave, but they had no idea I had spent the night building a seawall, a wall made of their own greed. The stock climbed 5%, then 10%, then 15%. My options were now deep in the money. My $55 million bet was now worth over $90 million, and it was still climbing. I had punched Arthur Vance in the mouth, in broad daylight, in front of the entire world. He didn't know who had hit him or how. All he knew was that his perfect, unstoppable plan was suddenly, inexplicably, and catastrophically failing. I leaned back, allowing myself a moment of grim satisfaction. He had started a war under the cover of darkness. I was about to drag it out into the sun. They thought they had buried me. They didn't realize they had only planted a seed. This wasn't about the money anymore. It was about taking control of the board. Arthur Vance had used Chronos as his weapon. I was turning Nyx into my sword and shield. He thought he knew how to play the game. I was about to teach him how it was won. I didn't just build a fortress. I built a cannon. The silence that followed the market close was louder than any alarm. The battle for Lumina Dynamics was over, and I had won. The stock closed up 23%. My options were a gold mine. In a single trading day, my $55 million had become a staggering $140 million, but it wasn't a victory lap. It was the moment between the lightning flash and the thunderclap. The real storm was about to break. Marcus was my real-time feed of the chaos. His texts came in a frantic stream. They're having a full-blown meltdown. Leo tried to blame a market glitch. Nobody's buying it. The board has called an emergency meeting. Arthur is locked in his office. A few minutes later, they found the options chain. They know it was a coordinated, targeted attack. They think it's a rival fund. They have no idea it was one person. And then, the one I was waiting for, Arthur just left his office. He looks different, not angry, pale, scared. He's heading for the exit. He wasn't running to his lawyers. He wasn't running to the board. He was running from a ghost. My phone rang. It was an unknown number, but I knew who it was. I let my voice modulator make my voice a half octave lower, removing any trace of emotion. "Hello, Arthur." There was a sharp, ragged breath on the other end. He was in a car, the sound of the city muffled in the background. "You," he hissed. "This was you. How did you get that kind of capital?" "You're asking the wrong question," I said calmly. "You shouldn't be asking how I got the money. You should be asking how I knew exactly which stock to buy and exactly when you were going to try and destroy it." Silence. He was connecting the dots, the cold dread dawning on him. "This isn't possible," he stammered. "My plan was perfect." "Your plan was greedy and predictable. You used a sledgehammer to crack a nut. You forgot to check if the nut was made of titanium. Phase 2 is over, Arthur. Your deal with Damien is dead. You're trapped." "I'll destroy you," he snarled, a flash of his old arrogance returning. "I'll bury you in litigation. I'll have you arrested for market manipulation. I have the best lawyers money can buy. And I have a recording," I said, letting the words hang in the air. "A very clear one from a steakhouse, about selling off assets to your rival, about gutting your own firm for a kickback. I don't think your lawyers will want to put that into discovery, do you?" The silence on the other end was absolute. I could almost hear his world shattering. He wasn't just facing financial ruin or a lawsuit, he was facing a federal prison. "What do you want?" He finally whispered, his voice broken. "All the power, all the bluster gone. What I want," I said, my voice like ice, "is for you to understand this. You thought you could break me because you saw me as just another employee, another line item on a spreadsheet. You didn't just fire a programmer, Arthur. You created a market event with a name, and that name is Sloane Jacobs." I hung up. It was time to end it. I opened a new, secure email client. I attached 5 files. File 1, the complete, unedited logs from my silent monitor on Chronos, showing every keystroke Arthur Vance ever made. File 2, the full security footage from my apartment, showing Leo Petrov's hired goon breaking in, complete with a timestamp. File 3, the location data from the beacon, tracking the cloner device from my apartment directly to Leo Petrov's condo. File 4, a full forensic analysis of the money trail, linking Sterling Gable's losses to Lyra Capital's gains and the kickbacks flowing through the Cayman Islands. File 5, the centerpiece, the full, crystal-clear audio file of Arthur Vance and Damien cross at the steakhouse, plotting the destruction of their own companies. I addressed the email to 3 recipients: Director Stevenson at the SEC, Jenna Sharma. And for maximum impact, the personal email address of every single member of the Sterling Gable Board of Directors. The subject line was simple: evidence regarding SEC case number 830247, Sterling Gable and Lyra Capital. I hit send. The thunderclap was immediate and deafening. Marcus's texts became a live broadcast of the firm's complete and total implosion. Board members are storming into the conference room. They look like they've seen a ghost. The chairman of the board just walked out of the meeting, got on his phone, and I heard him scream, "Sell it all." "Sloane, oh my God, men in suits just walked onto the trading floor, dark suits, FBI. They're taking Leo, they're cuffing him at his desk, everyone is just staring. Vance is back, they must have stopped him at the door, he's not fighting, he just looks empty, they're walking him out." I watched the news feeds light up. FBI raids Sterling Gable headquarters. CEO Arthur Vance taken into custody. Massive fraud investigation rocks Wall Street. Damien Cross was arrested an hour later, pulled off his private jet at Teterboro Airport. I closed my laptop. The silence in my command center was no longer tense. It was serene. The war was over. 6 months later, I stood in a bright, airy office in Soho, looking out over the city. The space was open, collaborative, filled with glass and light. The opposite of the dark, compartmentalized world of Sterling Gable. On the door, in clean, minimalist lettering, were the words, Cassandra Capital. I named it after my first shell company. The prophetess who saw the future but was never believed. This time, we would be believed because our predictions would be backed by unshakable, transparent data. My first 2 hires were standing with me. Marcus, now my head of system architecture, looked out the window with a grin that wouldn't quit. Jenna Sharma, my general counsel and chief compliance officer, held a flute of champagne. She had resigned from Sterling Gable the day after the raid, her reputation not just intact, but burnished with a glow of integrity. "To Cassandra," she said, raising her glass, "may we always see the truth. And may we always have the code to prove it," Marcus added with a laugh. I raised my own glass. To building something that lasts, I said, on a foundation of transparency. We had started the fund with the capital I had won. Our mission was simple: to use quantitative analysis not to exploit chaos, but to fund real, sustainable growth. We invested in the very companies Arthur had tried to destroy. Our flagship investment was in Ethelred Biosystems, whose stock had tripled since we first invested. Our clients weren't faceless institutions. They were pension funds, university endowments, and foundations that wanted their money to do more than just grow. They wanted it to build a better world. The market doesn't send you a calendar invite before it changes your life. It can be cruel, arbitrary, and unforgiving. My career was supposed to end that cold Tuesday in October. I was supposed to be a casualty, a footnote in another story of Wall Street greed, but they made a critical error in their calculations. They treated me like a variable in their equation, a problem to be solved and eliminated. They never realized I was the one writing the algorithm. Getting fired, disgraced, and hunted was the worst thing that ever happened to me. It was also the best. It stripped away everything but my own conviction and my own skills. It forced me to build something from nothing, on my own terms. My story isn't one of revenge. It's one of reclamation, about taking back your narrative, your work, and your future. They thought they could erase my name from the board. But they only gave me the freedom to build my own. This time, we were writing our own code.